Good morning, everyone. It's October 9th, 2018. The 72-hour red flag before New World Order 2018 martial law exposed. This has already been done in 30 of 50 states. And this is a rather lengthy article, and I really don't know how to nutshell it, so it's going to be a long fucking video. And this is, you'll see. You'll see. This has already been done in 30 of 50 states, the states being abolished. Study the Constitution of your state. You may find that your state constitution no longer describes the boundaries of the state, effectively abolishing the state. At last check, the only states that still lay their boundaries in their constitutions are Washington, Idaho, Montana, North and South Dakota, Wyoming, Iowa, Wisconsin, Indiana, Nevada, Utah, Colorado, Kansas, Arizona, New Mexico, Arkansas, Mississippi, Tennessee, Alabama, and Florida. All other states no longer define their boundaries in their constitutions. Only the states marked with a slash still retain state boundaries, which are still specified in their state constitutions. When the state borders are no longer in the state constitution, it is the signal that the state has lost its sovereignty and the citizens. How a central government has been formed, which is the step into international communism through the United Nations. Wake up, America. The prohibition in both the state and the United States constitutions are very clearly defined and impregnable. The only way that these changes can be made, of course, is to change the constitutions. The perpetrators of regional and world government well know this. They well know that the state governments will have to be abolished before they can force regional, metropolitan, and world government in the United States. This has already been done in 30 of the 50 states. What is FEMA? It's the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and most of my viewers already know this, but it was established by Executive Order 12-148 and signed into existence by Jimmy Carter in 1979. It was originally planned as an umbrella administration consisting of the disaster and emergency response arms of nearly a dozen scattered federal agencies. FEMA is the successor to the various cover agencies for bogus national emergency activity perpetrated since 1933. The Office of Emergency Preparedness, the Office of Defense Mobilization, the Office of Emergency Planning, the Economic Stabilization Agency, and the Civil Defense Administration. FEMA's major functions were unconstitutionally and in violation of the compact delegated under sham and pretense of a series of so-called executive orders, but without actual authority. While some national security planners applauded the 1979 creation of FEMA under Presidential Review Memorandum 32 as an effort to integrate all 9 federal agencies with responsibilities for civil defense, emergency planning, and implementation, The authors of the plan had one thing had other things in mind. The FEMA plan was written by Carter White House National Security Advisor Zbigniew Brzezinski and the National Security Staffer Samuel Huntington. 4 years earlier, Brzezinski and Huntington had been together at the Trilateral Commission's annual 1975 conference in Kyoto, Japan, where Huntington delivered a blood-curdling paper advocating the end of democracy and the imposition of crisis management forms of government. The Trilateral Commission linked magazine Challenge had earlier described the concept as fascism with a democratic face. NSC advisor Brzezinski called it the technotronic age. It was Brzezinski and Huntington's vision of a technocratic fascist structure that came into being with the creation of FEMA, not a legitimate and long overdue serious attempt at civil defense. Let me stop right there for a moment. Continuity of government is just that. It is only meant to preserve this form of government. That's why there's no civil defense shelters being built for you and I. These shelters are only for government officials. They have a room for people in each department of the government. They will try to collect taxes from you post-nuclear detonation or whatever other disaster you can think of. Just keep this in mind. Crisis of democracy. We have to come to recognize that there are potentially desirable limits to economic growth. There are also potentially desirable limits to the indefinite extension of political democracy. Within months after he had written this analysis, Huntington entered the old Executive Office building as an NSC staffer under the Trilateral Commission Executive Director Brzezinski. FEMA was cast in the crisis of democracy vision of the Commission's zero growth agenda. The transition from Carter to Reagan tended to accelerate rather than slow the buildup of the FEMA parallel government within the government program of the trilateralist Brzezinski and Huntington. Let me stop right there. People, a lot of these conservatives want to place the blame solely on Obama for creating a shadow government. This shadow government was created in 1979, this deep state. And it was created or moved along by Republicans like Ronald Reagan and George Bush. By 1984, FEMA's continuity of government structure was well oiled. Over 1,000 executive orders allocating extensive power to FEMA in the event of a string of national emergencies sat in a safe in the Oval Office, waiting only for the signature of the President. And in April of 1984, FEMA, in conjunction with the Department of Defense, held extensive secret maneuvers throughout the United States. If there was any doubt that Huntington's crisis of democracy vision was foremost in the minds of its planners, a declassified section of the exercise plan dubbed Rex 84 Bravo spelled out the scenario on which the operation was based. Quote, "The sudden withdrawal of cheap incremental loans to heavily indebted countries generated a number of consequences to both borrowers and lenders alike. The first was to throw the entire world into the worst recession since the Great Depression of the 1930s. The response of commercial banks was predictable. Both the multinational banks and the IMF emphasized three actions. A. Lower imports. B. Raise exports. C. Reduce the government sector debt by cutting subsidies and, in effect, cutting real wages. The outcome of this device on a worldwide basis was primarily social unrest. It occurred in the Warsaw Pact nations as well as free world countries. The major impact of a high and rising dollar with the interest rate of most loans tied to the London Interbank Offer Rate, or LIBOR rate, was to shift almost all import earnings from being used to pay for imports to being used to service debt, bankruptcies, and defaults on a massive scale developed, and doomsayers began to publish apocalyptic scenarios. And we are getting more near this or these apocalyptic scenarios. This so-called scenario was the basis of secret government contingency planning for installing crisis management at the very moment that Reagan was delivering false assurances to the American people and the nation's allies that great economic recovery, the Reagan Revolution, was underway, railroad by the Commission to investigate human rights violations. Americans computerized by FEMA. Fort Meade, Maryland, is the government's most tightly guarded installation. It houses, among others, the secret National Security Agency. In an unmarked, windowless office building on the grounds of Fort Meade, hundreds of thousands of American citizens are being computerized by technicians on the payroll of FEMA. Administratively, this place is the equivalent of an unlisted telephone, explained former senior official of FEMA who agreed to an interview on the condition that his identity be protected. It has no official existence. There is no listing for it, no traceable designation, but it's there, idling quietly like a doomsday bomb waiting for its moment in history. The task of FEMA's Secret Data Control Annex at Fort Meade is to develop so-called CAPs. The term stands for Crisis Action Programs, to be implemented in national emergencies. The term was originally used to denote disaster relief plans at the Federal Preparedness Agency, once a department of the General Services Administration, now merged into FEMA. But the computerization action plans instrumented at Fort Meade have nothing to do with aiding victims of hurricanes or other natural disasters. They are blueprints for taking over the U.S. government and converting it into a command system under the emergency management of federal bureaucrats. Privately, congressional investigators, intelligence analysts, and veteran Washington newsmen familiar with the inner machinery of the vast federal bureaucracy have long expressed certain concern and anxiety about FEMA. An umbrella administration born in 1978 when President Jimmy Carter combined the disaster and emergency response functions of nearly a dozen scattered federal outposts into a single agency. FEMA has always been known as an activist and secretive fraternity. Under Lewis, I'm not sure how to pronounce this name, and I'll probably butcher it, but I will try anyway. Giuffrida. That's probably the best I'm going to do. Under Louis Giuffrida, appointed FEMA director by President Ronald Reagan in 1981, the agency developed a top-secret project for arresting tens of thousands of suspects aliens, along with troublesome critics and dissenters whom the White House found annoying enough to be labeled potentially subversive. Tagged Operation Rex 84, these unconstitutional plans were first discovered and revealed by this populist newspaper, The Spotlight, in a series of exclusive investigative reports in the April 23rd and May 14th, 1984 issues. People are born with the innate desire to survive, but sadly, many in our increasingly dependent society look to others for relief and assistance following a disaster. The fact is that help from the government, family, or neighbors is often unavailable when needed most, and in the end you may have only yourself to count on. Do you know what to do and how to do it if a disaster strikes? Do you? Although the Spotlight's expose wrecked FEMA's plans for setting up mass emergency detention centers, which it didn't because we have them all over our fucking country, and cost Giuffrida his post as director, secret preparations for ensuring the continuity of the federal government in ill-defined emergencies remained the major concern of FEMA's senior officials. Those words, enunciated by President Gerald Ford in Executive Order 11-921, were understood by FEMA to mean that one day they would be in charge of the country, explained Dr. Henry Klierman, a political scientist at Boston University. Quote, as these bureaucrats saw it, FEMA's real mission was to wait, prepare, and then take over when some situation seemed serious enough to turn the United States into a police state. I'm going to stop right there for a moment. 9/11. That was the situation that was serious enough to turn the United States into a police state. And since then, it has been turned into a police state. To illustrate FEMA's conspiratorial core, knowledgeable Washington intelligence sources cited the instance of the 1989 visit by President George Bush to Cartagena, Colombia, to attend a so-called regional drug summit with 3 Latin American presidents. There were rumors of a terrorist threat against Bush by Colombian drug hit squads, recounted Monroe H. Brown, a former federal security officer with long years of service. Teams of Secret Service, FBI, CIA agents were mobilized to find out how serious the threat was, while back in Washington, FEMA went to work on an emergency program in case the presidential plane was hit by a Stinger missile somewhere over Colombia. FEMA's emergency measures included preparations to round up more than 10,000 Americans redlined in the agency's computer as activists, supporters, or sympathizers of terrorism in the United States, explained Brown. So, you know, that list of people swear is fake. It's right there. Right there. FEMA's emergency measures included preparations to round up more than 10,000 Americans redlined in the computer system. Okay? You do not live in the United States that you've been taught you do. In August 1990, after Iraq invaded Kuwait, FEMA got ready to deal with terrorist emergencies in the United States by churning up the same old discredited computer compilation of terrorist supporters and sympathizers, adding thousands of names to it and alerting the U.S. Army to set up detention camps to hold these innocent victims of its bureaucratic brutality. FEMA, Black Path Towards Martial Law. Emergency is the trigger word in the FEMA title. The director of FEMA shall, on behalf of the President, I can't see the numbers here, but not real well, but 1. Coordinate all mobilization activities of the executive branch, including production, procurement, manpower, stabilization, and transport. FEMA will be able to alter any existing contract. Number 2. The Federal Reserve System, with all of its branches, will become fiscal agents to the United States with dictatorial power over the economy of the nation. Number 3. The Treasury and Export-Import Bank will be authorized to make loans under the direction of FEMA and the Federal Reserve System. Number 4. During a national emergency, the President and elected official would be stripped of all his presidential functions. Number 5. Set up an executive branch of the government and a National Defense Executive Reserve, or NDER, composed of persons selected, not elected, from various segments of the civilian economy, from government, for training, for employment in executive positions in the event of a national emergency. Such reservists have been treasonously exempted from certain provisions of the Federal Criminal Code and may be employed without compensation. Now, right there, they can exempt any of these people from certain provisions of the Federal Criminal Code. That's why people like Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, so on and so forth, are able to get away with all the shit that they've gotten away with. Thanks to FEMA, however, the President has the power to bypass this process after declaring an emergency. These emergencies have never been defined in Congress. Seize or control every major national asset, provide for national security, and consolidate the assignment of emergency preparedness functions with various departments and agencies. The Department of Justice shall develop plans for administering laws regarding the import, manufacture, and distribution of narcotics. They can do anything at once relative to narcotics, since the term emergency purports to eliminate all law. They can declare martial law at any time, have the Department of the Interior take over all potable water, place all food production under the Department of Agriculture, take over all labor resources by means of lists already prepared by the Department of Labor, implement take over all forms of transportation by the Department of Transportation, assisted by the Civil Aeronautics Board, implement take over of all nuclear facilities by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, take over authority and presidential functions of all emergency agencies, and reduce the consequences of major terrorist incidents. Case and list some examples of the perpetration of a silent coup. For example, declaring certain areas to be military reserves and cause American citizens to be removed from their homes and imprisoned without trial under the pretense of racial differences. Now, right here, this should tell you, if you have any question as to whether you own your own home or not, if they can take it, if they can remove you from your home and take that shit, it's not yours. It's not yours. Another code provides that any military commander under FEMA can, under the color for national emergency, specify any area he desires as a military reserve and designate anyone living there as a criminal. When martial law is declared, the Constitution is no longer the law of the land. Let me stop right there. It has not been the law of the land for a long time. It is revoked and replaced with what amounts to a military dictatorship in much the same way that Latin American countries have been doing for scores of years. Those with the most weapons usually win. Most Americans know very well that a large share of men in uniform will not fight against their own people, particularly if the soldier is of their own ethnic background. The debate over martial law has been around for a long time. The Department of Defense recognizes that within our Constitution there is a question of lawfulness if the military is ordered to declare martial law over the citizens of the United States. This debate became extensive during the early days of the Federal Emergency Management Agency, while it was being developed in California by then-Governor Ronald Reagan and his advisor Edwin Meese. Colonel Guafrida moved to Washington with Reagan and Meese, completed the organizational concepts on a national level. The debate over martial law was extensive during the Garden Plot, Cable Splicer, and Rex 84 programs, wherein the military, primarily the National Guard, conducted training exercises to put down civil unrest. So the National Guard isn't what you think it is. The National Guard is here to kill you. In working with FEMA, the Department of Defense was given the replacement phrase martial rule. This is probably going to be a it will probably be done in 2 videos. I will stop probably at the end of the next paragraphs. All of the governments of the world recognize the term martial law. It means the same thing everywhere. When it is declared, the construction or the constitution of that country is suspended for as long as the military is in command. But with martial rule, these master planners believe that they will still have the constitution and have military command at the same time. The Rex 84 program is essentially a massive detention center program where they plan to incarcerate all seditionists during a declared national emergency. They will simply be declared felons, and the government will attempt to enforce the law with several million deputy U.S. Marshals. So, this is just the tip of the iceberg. This article goes on for quite some time. I'm going to try to make it in 2 videos. It's probably going to be more like 3 or 4 videos on this topic. Please do comment below. And for people like, I don't know, Mike Adams and Jones and the rest of them, fuck you. For the people like Antifa and Black Lives Matter, fuck you. And for the rest of you, kill the state before it comes and drags you off to a fucking prison camp.